The image of that day is permanently burned into my mind. It was September 3rd, 2002. Our country was still grieving from the attacks the year prior, and patriotism was at a 2-decade high. I'd just met my wife at a friend's birthday party a month earlier. Everything was looking rosy for me. Work was my only weak point, and when I say weak, I simply mean I was stuck in a rut. Not good, nor bad. A day or two before Halloween, I saw my chance to further myself in the company. There was an amazing opportunity opening up in Mexico City, but if I wanted to take advantage, I had to fly out as soon as possible. After discussing this with my boss, he gave me the okay to pursue it. I immediately purchased a plane ticket for midnight and landed just as the sun rose the next morning. And according to my contacts, the man I was planning to meet wouldn't be available until after 8 a.m. I took advantage of the gap in time by taking a nap. When I woke up, I took a quick shower and climbed into my best suit. I was about to make the most important contact in my life, and looking my best would be of the utmost necessity. As the time approached, I called down to the front desk to get me a taxi. I reached the lobby where a young man showed me to my ride. I was feeling good that morning, and in retrospect, I made a big mistake. Foolishly, I tipped the clerk a $50 bill. His eyes almost blew out of his head. In light of what happened, I'm almost positive he was the person who sold me out. From the hotel, the taxi driver took me to my meeting. We made small talk along the way. He agreed to wait for me. I estimated the meeting wouldn't be more than an hour, and he seemed happy for this. As for the meeting itself, it probably could have gone better, but my goal was ultimately achieved. I returned to the taxi, and we began the return trip to the hotel. My mood was somewhat darker, and I avoided any conversation. I was in the process of texting my boss when the car stopped abruptly. This caused me to be slammed into the back of the seat. Naturally, I was livid. The curses came fast and loose from my mouth. Just as I regained the seat positioning, I noticed another taxi was parked in front of us. The driver of my car was silent. This didn't stop me from asking what was going on. I now realized that he was well aware of what was happening and may have played his own part in it. If I hadn't been yelling like a madman, I may have noticed the guy standing outside my window a little sooner. I just happened to catch a flash in my peripheral vision. When I looked over, I was met with a gun pointed right at me. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I raised my hands to indicate I was no threat. The guy holding the gun yanked my door open and demanded I give him my money. I quickly complied. While this was happening, a voice in the back of my head was praying he wouldn't notice my watch. It was very special to me. It belonged to my father. He was gifted it by my mother on their 25th anniversary. I received it in his will when he passed in '97. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't wear something so valuable, especially in Mexico, but it had been good luck in the past and I needed it on this trip. All this caused me to hesitate when the gunman started yelling "watch" in broken English. I tried to pretend I didn't understand. He grabbed at my wrist with his empty hand instead. I stupidly yanked my arm away and he drove the pistol into my guts. Everything went into slow motion. I watched in horror as the hammer on the revolver began cocking back. He clearly wasn't messing around. I managed to get the watch off before the gun went off. He let off the trigger, just in time as far as I could tell. He ran back to the other taxi and they tore off down a side street. I was just beginning to see that I had been taken into the middle of nowhere. Not a soul was around and the buildings were barely standing upright. Had I been 10 years younger, I probably would have fought back. The environment in the taxi afterwards was chilling. I could see the driver's eyes darting back and forth in the rearview mirror. He didn't dare speak. He had to know I suspected him. Why hadn't he been robbed also? I now had an important decision to make. Was I going to the police or just returning to the hotel and then going to the airport? I was stuck between two decisions. It's no secret the Mexican police are corrupt. For all I know, even they could be complicit in the robbery. The angry side of me said to confront the hotel clerk. I took a few moments to consider my options and chose to cut my losses and just get out of Mexico. I told the driver to return to the hotel if he wanted to be paid. This wasn't my first rodeo after all. I never carried much cash on my person. What I left behind would be all but impossible to find if a hotel employee went snooping. Upon our return, I ran up to my room and retrieved the taxi money. I paid him without a word, and he took off just as silently. It was now time for the clerk to feel my wrath, and he greeted me with a fake smile and asked how things were going. In a calm but aggressive voice, I mentioned the robbery. I had no time for his false sympathy and informed him how his accomplices had gotten away with a mere $30 in cash. There was no way I was going to give him the satisfaction of knowing how badly the loss of my father's watch hurt me. He tried to deny it all, of course, but I wasn't hearing it. Not once did he offer to call the police. I told him that I knew what he'd done, and that I was going to make sure everyone I talked to was aware of what was happening in this hotel. I closed by calling him a low-life scumbag and made my way from my room. It wasn't much, but it was going to have to do. I went back to my room and gathered my things to leave. I paid for the hotel beforehand, and my plane ticket was a round trip. I had no further need of that place and its staff. There were several taxis waiting outside the hotel. I grabbed one and he drove me to the airport, and I had no further problems from then on. I had waited to notify my boss of the robbery until I returned to work. He was horrified, as you'd expect. I also made sure that he knew I was never returning to Mexico again. He could fire me if he wanted, but there was no amount of money that could draw me back there. To his credit, he was cool and understood my reservations. My next call was to the man I'd gone there to meet. I wasn't contacting him for any updates as much as letting him know that I'd be passing off any future dealings to another team member. When he inquired why, I told him about the robbery and stressed that I held him in no way responsible for it. He didn't say much other than he understood, and we ended the call. I must admit I was somewhat shocked when I heard that he had agreed to the deal. Even better, he would be coming to the US in the future as to prevent any further threats to our employees. I can't say for sure, but I kinda think he may have felt guilty, although I made it clear I didn't blame him. We've never talked about it, and that's fine with me. I'd rather forget about it myself. This will be my last time discussing the matter. There was one last call I had to make, and it was the hardest. The sadness in her voice upon hearing of the watch was crystal clear. Mom said she didn't blame me, but I could tell it hurt her soul to hear that. It was the first time I can remember crying since second grade. I've since purchased another date made the same year and had it inscribed with the same words as Dad's. I wear it every year at Christmas, and that's all. Mom loves seeing it, but I'm well aware it will never be a true replacement for the original.
Hey guys, it's Rye Horror. It seems like many of you guys enjoy my animated stories, but only 27% of you are subscribed. If you want to see this channel hit 10k subs, then please like and subscribe. Now back to the show.
Before I even get to my story, I want to emphasize the point of me writing this. There was more than enough blame for what happened to go around for all of us. The decision was ours to cut corners. Trusting our mother's home to a stranger was stupid. No one denies that. However, the events that unfolded as a result were 100% not our fault. We did everything society tells us to do. The police were called, and their job was to protect my sister. They failed in their job. This is on their hands. My number one aim is to impress upon you to know that it's important to fully vet any individual before allowing them to access your home. The following story is written to drive home this very important point. At the end of 2019, just before Christmas in fact, my mother passed away from a long-term illness. As I was already married and set up in a home of my own, my mother left her home to my younger sister, Emily. Emily had been renting up until this time. Her lease had just ended, so she moved in until she was sure of what she was going to do with it. She knew she had my support regardless of her decision. My wife and I threw her a surprise housewarming party for her. At the party, one of Emily's coworkers gave her a kitten as a gift. She'd been unable to have any pets in her apartment. It was love at first sight. The weeks after the party were life as usual for all of us. Emily managed to litter train the kitten and all was going well. Just before Valentine's Day, Emily's employer notified her of a business conference she was required to attend. It was part of her job, and this would be her first trip since she had moved into the new house. Normally, this would be simple, but now, with the kitten, things were a tad more complicated. My family was unable to watch the kitten because of my daughter's allergies. Kenneling was briefly considered until the price was found to be too great. Besides, she didn't like the idea of her precious little angel being locked up for 3 days. She chose to search on Craigslist for house sitters. An earlier call to a service proved too high also. She found this young girl, around 19, who claimed to be an independent house sitter. They spoke first on the phone, then met at the house so she could look around. The girl seemed kind and professional. After agreeing on an amount, the deal was set. 2 weeks later, Emily kissed her kitty goodbye and left for her trip. She checked in the first night and all sounded like it was going well. 2 days later, she returned to a nightmare. The clean, beautiful home she had left was now scattered with clothes and dirty dishes. When she confronted the girl got mad and said she wasn't a maid. Things only got worse from there. My sister was horrified to see that the litter box was full and the kitten had already began going on the floor. Certainly not the poor cat's fault, and this infuriated my sister and she refused to pay the girl. An argument broke out and the police were eventually called. They really couldn't do much other than force the girl to leave the property, but the girl was furious. She vowed she'd get back at my sister as she left. This was all said in front of the police, but they obviously didn't take the threat seriously. The officer went on their way and my sister began cleaning up the mess inside. A few days passed and Emily tried to put the experience behind her. That Friday, soon after returning from work, a man rang the doorbell and asked for her. She identified herself and the man began demanding the money owed to the young girl. My sister calmly explained the situation, but he only grew more aggressive. Although she was now terrified, she held her ground and refused. This was when the man backhanded her. She fell back and hit her head on the floor. Unfortunately, he wasn't done. He approached her and demanded the money again. My sister, who was clearly concussed, didn't answer, so he punched her unconscious. Apparently, while she was out, he entered the house and stole all the cash from her purse. By the time she had awakened, he was gone. It took her several minutes to crawl to her phone and call 911. They arrived soon after and she was rushed to the hospital. I'm happy to say that there's no long-term physical injuries, but mentally, Emily was a mess. And still is, honestly. To be frank, had I known the identity of the man and his location, I would have killed him. Fortunately, I regained my senses and agreed to leave it in the authorities' hands, despite their inability to prevent it. The responsible parties were found and arrested within a couple of days. It wasn't some great mystery after all. The man who assaulted Emily was an ex-boyfriend of the young girl. She had promised him half of the money to retrieve it. The young girl claimed she never intended anyone to be hurt, but her threat in front of witnesses, cops at that, sealed her fate. She managed to get away with probation because she had no priors. Her ex, on the other hand, had a long record. He was given 3 years. But once the COVID crisis began, he was released early. The entire family was less than happy to hear of the lenient sentences, but criminals getting off easy is nothing new under the sun these days. In the months since the attack, everyone has done their most to be there for Emily. Her recovery is going well and she seems to be responding to therapy. The lockdowns have proved a blessing for her. She's been able to heal at a much slower and calm pace. Until restrictions are lifted completely, she'd been approved to work from home. Her little furry friend has served as a priceless companion for her during this terrible time. Although some may say he was the cause of this whole awful mess, I'm glad he's been around to keep her company. Back in July of 2013, I was doing a little solo backpacking around the Olympic Peninsula up in Washington State, with various stops in the Olympic National Park. A few days in, I happened to stop in Quinault and ended up on some random road that dead-ended on a beautiful spot at the edge of the Quinault River. It really was something to see. There was this old footbridge that led across the river, and it looked like something out of the Lord of the Rings. With it being July, it was way too hot outside, and there I am, all alone with All this crisp, clean, cool-looking water just sitting there in front of me. By that point, I don't think I'd actually washed properly for maybe 4 or 5 days, so I wasn't exactly feeling at my freshest. You can probably guess what came next. I drove my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, turned it around just in case I needed to get out of there in a hurry, then started hiking down an embankment to the edge of the water with a towel in hand. I didn't have any swimwear with me at the time, but I made a note to pick some up in the future and figured a quick dip in my underwear could have me nice and clean without feeling too exposed. It sounds weird considering how deep in the woods I was. I mean, it seemed like I was totally alone. But heavy emphasis on seemed because, as it turned out, I wasn't totally alone. You know how people talk about that feeling of being watched? It seems like a total cliche, doesn't it? Like surely it depends on how paranoid the person is. Well, I'm not in the least bit paranoid, and I'd go so far as to say I'm something of an exhibitionist. I have friends that would rather pony up for a hotel just to use the bathroom, hence why I was backpacking alone. I didn't feel like I was being watched necessarily, so much as it dawned on me that what I was doing was just a bad idea. I couldn't work out why at first. It's not like great whites are known to swim up into the Quinault, but in the end, it just felt like I was too exposed, too vulnerable. I tried telling myself I was being irrational, but I just couldn't seem to shake the feeling. So, after just a few minutes of scrubbing, I climbed out of the river, then walked over to the spot I'd stashed my clothes and towel. As I'm walking up the embankment, keep in mind that I have my back to the other side of the river, and since I was at my clothes and towel, it kind of felt like I was at a home base. Yet just when that feeling of exposure and vulnerability was going away, I happened to catch a glimpse of something on the opposite bank. I honestly thought it was a bear or something at first glance, but it quickly became obvious that a bear was the least of my troubles at that moment. Standing on the opposite side of the river, a little higher up than me, was a man. It looked like every single item of clothing he was wearing had been hand-stitched and made from animal hide. His hair kind of looked like dreadlocks, but I later realized that some of his hair strands looked more like they'd been woven around twigs. He looked like a full-on mountain man. Like I remember my skin crawling when I saw my boyfriend playing that dumb cowboy game years later. He was obsessed with making animal clothes, and one of his outfits looked almost exactly like my peeping Tom. Only peeping Toms are just an annoyance, whereas I know this guy had other stuff in mind. After just staring at each other for a moment, totally surprised to have come across one another, the guy made a beeline for the rickety old bridge. At first, seeing that made me feel like I was going to puke. I was praying that the worst it'd get would be him shouting, "Put some clothes on," or something. But the fact that he wanted to close the distance without even saying anything to me, he obviously didn't have good intentions. I just burst into action and grabbed my car keys, clothes, and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I made the split-second decision to just leave my clothes and get out of there with my life. When I made it out of the blackberry bush, I could see he was crossing the bridge toward me rapidly. I got to my car, flung my door open just as he'd arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back, and he was chasing after me. He must have run after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly without anything on through blackberry bushes, and I was wet, unclothed, shaking, and crying. Had I hesitated for just a few seconds longer, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Even typing the story out again all these years later, I'm starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. That is the only way I can describe it. I'll never, ever go back to that area. Since then, I always bring a hiking buddy with me when I venture out into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for my life. I've had many years of therapy, and that experience is still as vivid as the day it happened.
Hey guys, it's Rye Horror. It seems like many of you guys enjoy my animated stories, but only 27% of you are subscribed. If you want to see this channel hit 10k subs, then please like and subscribe. Now back to the show.
I was 16 and we met on Facebook. He went to a school nearby and we decided to meet up for a movie. We had a great time together and ended up dating. First time he came to my parents' house, he had an ankle monitor on for house arrest and wouldn't tell anyone why. Red flag number 1. And since he was a minor, we couldn't find out. My parents obviously didn't allow us to hang out, so we hung out at his house or around town at the YMCA camp. I was rebellious and naive. Things started to get weird when I noticed his family was pretty odd. One day we were doing it in his bedroom, and I saw his father looking in through the blinds. I screamed and called him out, and his dad ran off. The stalker guy told me that his dad was just into redheads and liked to watch us, so this wasn't the first time. I went to leave, and his mum was doing crack in the kitchen, so I decided it was time to break up, and this is when things got bad. He started crying and told me that he's in cancer treatment, and that's why he needs me. He doesn't have long to live. I believed him and told him we could be friends. This is when the stalking started. He switched schools to my high school, but never went to class. He would just stand outside my classroom looking inside until it was passing period. When I would leave class, he wouldn't address me. He would just follow, about 10 to 15 feet behind me to my next period, and stand outside the classroom again. I was too intimidated to say something to him, as he was 6'4" and heavy set, so I just let it happen for a few weeks. It started to progress when he would follow me home every day. He would get on the same bus as me, despite living across town, and walk 10 to 15 feet behind me all the way to my house. He would stand outside, just staring up at the window, until around the time my parents got home, and then he would just leave. Finally, I told him to piss off and leave me alone. I told him we could no longer be friends or acquaintances or anything, and to forget about me. However, that escalated things way further. I started getting about 150 calls a night. Half of them were him screaming death threats and in detail torture methods that he wanted to do to me, and the other half were him singing me love songs that he wrote on his guitar. Every time I blocked his number, he seemed to just magically get a new one and leave more messages on that. I woke up one day to see that overnight he had left me one of these dancing, singing snowmen on my porch. He had stabbed it in the head, and the knife was sticking out. He covered it in his liquid deodorant that I had previously mentioned liking the smell of, and I noticed that there was a hole where the little song recording device was. When I pressed the hand, it was not the regular Frosty the Snowman song that played. It was his voice singing eerily, "I'm gonna have you forever. I'm never gonna let you go." I was done at this point and told my parents, who contacted the school. They suspended him, but he still waited at my bus stop every day and walked to my home with me. One day he ran at me, like he was going to tackle me. When I tensed up for the impact, he stopped and hugged me. It wasn't a regular hug, it was like he was trying to crush me. I was 5'1" and about 90 pounds at the time, and he ended up cracking one of my ribs. I cried and he started crying too before running off, and he left me a voicemail apologizing in song. This one night is the night I'll never forget, and it's the reason why we got a restraining order and my dad got a gun. I woke up one evening for no reason. I was just fully awake. I got up to go to my kitchen to get a glass of water and relax, and in the reflection on my fridge I saw movement in the backyard. I couldn't see well because it was so dark outside and so light inside, so I went to the back sliding glass door to get a better look. When I got closer, I was met with the silhouette of a 6'4" man standing just outside the door. The stalker guy was standing in my backyard under my room at 3 a.m. He was just staring at me. I yelled at my parents and got them up, but of course he was gone by the time my dad got outside. There's a patio right outside my bedroom window that goes all the way around to the ground, so it's possible he could have been on top of the patio looking directly into my bedroom window before. We got a restraining order granted shortly after, and Stalker Guy dropped out of school. I haven't seen him in person, but every 6 months-ish, he makes a new Facebook and tries to friend request me. I block and report it every time. Have you ever heard that myth that if you wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, there's likely someone looking at you? Well, maybe it's true.
I live in a city with a public transportation system. They've been extremely short-staffed, and more often than not, you have to call to make sure your bus is even coming. On weekdays, during business hours, the public transit operator will order a lift for you to get to work if your bus isn't showing up or if they're short a driver. Tuesday, I'm at the bus stop after checking multiple times if my bus is coming, only to find out that it wasn't. They ordered me a lift, and this nice older gentleman was my driver. We had casual conversation, and he started to ask personal questions. I'm a bartender, and I'm super friendly already, so I didn't think his questions were ill-intentioned. Told him I'm not married and that I'm pretty much a loner. I basically go to work and go home and spend my time with family. He then says, "I'd marry you in a heartbeat." Again, I'm just thinking that he's being funny or nice. I asked him to drop me off at the downtown grocery so I could pick up some things that I needed for work. When we stopped, he said he was joking, that he's married and has a son my age. Asked if I was interested in maybe meeting him. Since I have a terrible track record, I figured it wouldn't hurt meeting someone out of my circle and comfort zone, so I gave the man my number and we parted ways. The next morning, he texted me and asked if I needed a ride to work. I told him he didn't have to do that and that I was sure my bus was running. He said it would be his pleasure and that he'd pick me up at my house at 3 p.m. Then about an hour later, he asked if I wanted to have lunch with him before work. I told him I was busy and that I couldn't do that. He said, "Okay, see you at 3. He shows up right at 3 and lets me know that he's outside. While I'm finishing getting my things together, I open the door and he's starting to walk up my stairs to my house. I told him I was ready and we could head downtown. When I get in the back seat, he turns around and says that he has a confession. He told me from the time I took off my mask, his heart danced like a butterfly. He said that he hasn't been able to stop thinking about me since the day before and that he'd love to spend time with me and that he'd pay me for my time if I spent a day with him. That's when I started to feel super uncomfortable. The whole ride was making me cringe, but know that when you're in a situation like that with the predator, playing nice is sometimes safer than freaking out. He continued on the entire ride about how he loved me at first sight and wanted to make me his Lebanese queen. As we got closer to downtown, I started to feel relief. He dropped me off at my hotel and said, "See you tomorrow." That evening at work, I checked my phone after a bust happy hour and he's texted me a couple of times. He sent a picture of the hotel and said that he'd wait for me to get off to give me a ride home. I told him I already had a ride, but thank you anyways. Thursday morning, I'm out running errands with my mom and sister. He texts me and asks how early he can pick me up because he can't stop thinking about me. I asked him to please stop and that I was with family. He continues to text me all day and evening, begging to see me and telling me his heart is aching to see his Lebanese queen. I just kept saying to please stop. Now Friday morning is where stuff hit the fan. He tells me he loves me no matter what. He said I told my wife about you and that I'm in love with you and I want a divorce. I told him to please don't do that and that it wasn't right to treat his wife that way. He said it wasn't my fault. They were drifting apart anyways. Then he said I'm picking up for dinner at 5:30 and I'm not taking no for an answer. I ignored the messages during the day and just went about my off day. At around 5:25, my video doorbell rings and he's standing on my porch for at least 15 minutes. I told him I wasn't home and that he should leave. He continues to text me and even begs to come pick me up from my parents. I was home the whole time, but I was just too scared to let him know that. I eventually called the non-emergency police station, but he had already left by the time I got through. I filed a general report, but technically they can't do anything unless he's standing on my porch threatening me. They advised me to make a report through Lyft, so I did. And I haven't heard anything since then, but honestly, that was one of the most threatening and creepy moments of my life. I've also attached the doorbell footage so you can get an idea of what he's like.
Come on, open up, please. Be sweet. Don't disappoint me, please. Yeah.
Back when I was 17, my first real girlfriend texted me one night to be like, "Parents are on a date night. Come over and we'll have the place to ourselves." Yep, the text that every young man waits for, the one that makes everything around you glow in gold while you hear the voice of God saying, "My son, you have been chosen. Now go forth and multiply." I've been planning on a night of Modern Warfare 3 with the boys, but within minutes, I was in the shower scrubbing the enamel off my teeth in order to become a little mint, drowning myself in cologne and raiding my brother's rubber stash for an entire platoon's worth. I remember texting her like, "Want me to bring anything over? I got a few Red Barons." And she just replied, "Nah, just bring yourself." What a feeling, dude. Girlfriend is home alone and all she wants delivered is me. So I rushed to finish off getting dressed, spent like 5 straight minutes in the mirror making sure I looked fresh and clean. So fresh and so clean. And then I was ready to go. The walk over to my girlfriend's place took like 20 minutes, so from the time of getting the text to me actually arriving, couldn't have been any more than an hour. She had one of those long driveways too, not like some southern manor house or anything like that, but enough so you got a long look at the house as you were walking up to it. Then right as I'm about halfway up the driveway, I see someone walking through one of the upstairs bedrooms who was definitely not my girlfriend. I stop dead in my tracks, look up at this guy, and I've got this weird mix of anger and confusion and just utterly feeling a little bit heartbroken. I whip out my phone, dial my girlfriend's number, only to find her phone is switched off. My head is just swimming with negative thoughts. I think I was about to have a panic attack, like I just couldn't believe she'd do that to me. I was checking if I had the right house, double-checking the upstairs bedroom, like 100% certain that I'd just seen someone, but also telling myself, no way, I must be hallucinating or something. But nope. That same dude in the green hoodie walks through her parents' bedroom again, like all the way in and then all the way out. But on the way out, he sees me and he stops and stares at me. He's looking at me like, "Who are you, my guy?" Where I'm looking at him like, "Me? Who are you?" But as I'm looking, I notice there's something weird about his face. It's all distorted. And then it hits me that his face is all distorted because he's wearing like literal pantyhose over his head, like a meme of a bank robber or something. Then right as I'm thinking like, what kind of weird stuff is this? I'm like, oh no, he's not a meme. He's literally robbing the place. I just panicked and ran back down the driveway before dialing 911. But then as I'm giving the operator all the details, I realized that my arrival might have prompted something bad to happen to my girlfriend. I ended up running back up the driveway, kicking on the door and shouting up at the window, "Cops are on their way. You better get out of there." I added a few expletives, but I won't say them here. I didn't hear anyone shouting back. In fact, I couldn't hear anything going on inside at all. But that didn't mean there wasn't anything going on. The intruders, home invaders, whatever you want to call them, they could have been doing anything to my girlfriend in there. And that's if they hadn't done something irreversible already. Waiting those few minutes for the cops to arrive was agony, but the dispatcher promised me that they'd roll up with their lights and sirens blaring to try and scare the intruders off. We later found out that worked like a charm, but No one realized that until we were inside and my girlfriend was safe. She was scared to death, but she was okay, and it turned out that my timing had been absolutely impeccable. The two guys that broke in through the rear door of the house had only just tied her up in her bedroom and were right in the middle of ransacking the house when I showed up. And yes, they were actually wearing pantyhose. Seems kind of ridiculous, but the cops told me it's the smart choice for home invaders, I guess. You get pulled over with a ski mask in your passenger seat in Florida, questions are going to be asked. But a pair of pantyhose, you could just shrug it off and say, oh, that's just Mima's laundry day, or something, and there's no probable cause. Needless to say, when the cops left, we were way too shaken up for any alone time, and my girlfriend was in no mood to hang out at a place that had just gotten broken into, so we ended up going back to my parents' place to hang out. Nothing in the way of privacy, so I didn't get the explosive evening I'd been hoping for, but still, it was just cool to have been the one to have saved her, as she put it. I didn't save anyone. Those dudes only bailed when the cops showed up, but still, you can bet I took all the credit she wanted to give me. We ended up dating until maybe our sophomore year of college. After that, neither of us could handle the distance. But we still keep in touch, and I'm pretty sure our little post-relationship friend status is rooted solely in that mild shared trauma of having confronted a pair of home invaders together.